The snow in Chicago doesn't fall, it attacks. It was 5 minutes to midnight on New Year's Eve, and the wind was a serrated blade cutting through my thin silk dress. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, I just needed to get away from the gala, away from the eyes that were constantly tracking my every move. My phone screen was cracked, the rideshare app pulsing a dying crimson light. Black sedan. License plate ending in 729. Driving now. A sleek, obsidian vehicle pulled to the curb, its exhaust ghosting into the frozen air like a warning. I didn't hesitate. I yanked the door open and lunged into the back seat, the scent of expensive sandalwood and cold metallic rain instantly swallowing me whole. Thank God, I gasped, fumbling with my clutch. Just drive. Please. Anywhere but here. I expected the generic hello of a tired driver. I expected the smell of cheap air freshener. Instead, there was a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing the oxygen out of the cabin. The interior wasn't a standard interior. It was a fortress of hand-stitched leather and dim gold ambient lighting that made the shadows dance like demons. The locks clicked. It wasn't the soft chirp of a standard car. It was the heavy hydraulic thud of a vault ceiling shut. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird in a cage of bone. I looked toward the driver's seat. The man sitting there wasn't wearing a rideshare uniform. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my life was worth. His hands, draped over the steering wheel, were massive, scarred across the knuckles and steady as stone. He didn't turn around immediately. He just watched me through the rearview mirror, eyes the color of a winter sea, cold and unfathomable. "You're in the wrong car, Ellen," he said. His voice was a low, melodic growl that vibrated in my very marrow. How did he know my name? I reached for the door handle, pulling with a frantic, desperate strength. It didn't budge. "Let me out. I made a mistake. I thought you were my ride. Open the door." He turned then, his body shifting with the predatory grace of a wolf. The gold light caught the sharp line of his jaw and the jagged scar that ran from his temple to his cheekbone. This wasn't a man. He was a monument to violence and power. This was Dominic Toretto Corleone. The man my handlers had described as a butcher. The man I had been trained for 3 years to infiltrate and destroy. He leaned back, his gaze raking over me, stripping away my facade until I felt naked in the dark. He didn't look angry. He looked like he had just found something he had been seeking for a lifetime. "The doors only open when I say they do," Dominic whispered, his hand reaching back to rest on the leather inches from my knee. "And I've decided I'm not saying it tonight. Or tomorrow. Or ever again." He leaned closer, the heat radiating off him, defying the sub-zero temperatures outside. "The world thinks you disappeared into the snow, Ellen. Let them think it. From this moment on, the outside world ceases to exist for you." He paused, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips, a look that promised both heaven and a very specific kind of hell. "You're mine now." Before I could scream, before I could reach for the blade hidden in my garter, the car surged forward, disappearing into the whiteout of the Chicago night. I was exactly where I needed to be to complete my mission, but as the lock stayed frozen and his eyes stayed fixed on mine, I realized with a jolt of pure terror, I wasn't the hunter anymore. I was the prey. Hello to all our incredible viewers. I am so thrilled to have you here for this journey. Before we dive deeper into this web of shadows and silver linings, I want to take a moment to welcome you. Where are you joining us from today? Whether you're watching from a rainy city or a quiet countryside, we're so glad you're here. How are you all doing? If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button and join our community. It helps us keep telling these stories that touch the heart and thrill the soul. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next to Ellen. What happens when the man you're sent to kill is the only one who can truly see you? And what secret was Dominic holding even as he locked those doors? The car glided through the snow-choked streets of Chicago, a silent predator in a ghost city. I pressed my back against the door, the cold from the window seeping into my shoulder blades, but it was nothing compared to the icy focus of the man in the front seat. To the world, I was Ellen Ripley Hunt, a socialite orphan with a penchant for charity galas and a tragic backstory. But beneath the silk and the calculated vulnerability was a weapon forged in the fires of the Vanguard syndicate. My life hadn't been my own since I was 12. My father, a man the syndicate claimed was murdered by Dominic's family, had left me with nothing but a debt of vengeance. The syndicate, led by a man I only knew as the director, had raised me, fed me, and hollowed me out until there was nothing left but a singular purpose: to get close to the butcher of the Great Lakes and dismantle his empire from the inside. Dominic Toretto Corleone was a name whispered in the darkest corners of the city. He was the man responsible for the Red Christmas massacre of 2019, the one who supposedly laundered blood money through the very orphanages I pretended to support. He was a monster in a tailored suit. And yet, as I watched him through the mirror, I saw something that wasn't in the briefing files. There was a profound, aching weariness in his eyes. It wasn't the fatigue of a man who enjoyed his sins. It was the exhaustion of an atlas holding up a crumbling world. "You're shaking," Dominic said, his voice slicing through my internal monologue. He didn't look back, but he reached into the center console and tossed a heavy cashmere coat into the back seat. "Put it on. I have no use for a frozen bird." "I don't want anything from you," I spat, my voice trembling despite my training. "You kidnapped me. Do you have any idea who my connections are?" "By morning, the police." "The police won't look for you where we're going," he interrupted, his tone chillingly calm. "And your connections are exactly why you're in this car. You think you're a ghost, Alan? You're a beacon. And you've been walking into a trap for years. I'm just the one who finally closed the cage." We arrived at the Corleone estate, a brutalist masterpiece of stone and glass perched on the edge of Lake Michigan. It looked like a fortress designed to keep the world out, or perhaps to keep the devil in. As the iron gates hissed shut behind us, I felt the finality of it. This was the lion's den. Waiting for us at the massive mahogany doors was a man who looked like he had been carved from the same granite as the house. This was Luca Brazivain, Dominic's right hand and shadow. His eyes were scanned me with a clinical coldness that made my skin crawl. "Is this her?" Luca asked, his voice a gravelly rasp. "This is her," Dominic replied, stepping out of the car and rounding to my side. He opened the door and offered a hand, not a gesture of chivalry but a silent command. "Welcome to the end of your old life, Alan." As I was led through the echoing halls, I took mental notes of every camera, every guard, every exit. But the more I saw, the more confused I became. The house wasn't filled with the hedonistic excess I expected. It was quiet. It was filled with books, ancient leather-bound volumes on history, law, and philosophy. In the grand dining room there were no piles of drugs or weapons. Instead, there was a single modest place setting and a photograph of a woman who looked strikingly like Dominic, her eyes filled with a kindness that seemed impossible in this house. "That was my mother," Dominic said, noticing my gaze. He stood by the fireplace, the flames casting long, flickering shadows across his face. "She believed in the law. She believed that a name could be redeemed. And you proved her wrong," I countered, my hand tightening on the strap of my clutch where my burner phone, my lifeline to the syndicate, lay hidden. Dominic walked toward me, his presence so overwhelming I had to fight the urge to step back. He stopped just inches away, the scent of sandalwood and something sharper, ink and gunpowder, filling my senses. "I am the man the world needs me to be so that people like you can sleep," he whispered. "But don't mistake the mask for the man. You were sent here to find a monster, weren't you?" My heart skipped. He knew. Or he suspected. I had to play my part. I let a single perfect tear track down my cheek, the vulnerable orphan routine that had never failed me. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just want to go home." Dominic reached out, his thumb catching the tear. His touch was unexpectedly warm, his skin rough but his movement gentle. For a split second the predator disappeared and I saw a man who looked profoundly lonely. "You're a very good actress, Ellen," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "But I've been surrounded by liars since I was in the cradle. I can hear your heart racing. It's not fear. It's adrenaline. You're not a victim. You're a soldier." He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "And luckily for you, I'm in need of a soldier I can trust. Because the people who sent you, they don't want me dead because I'm a criminal. They want me dead because I'm the only one who knows they're the ones actually running the circus." He pulled back, a challenge in his gaze. "Sleep now. Tomorrow your training begins. Not as their pawn but as my partner. Whether you like it or not, you are bound to me. And I protect what is mine. He turned and left the room, the heavy oak door locking with that same ominous thud. I was alone in a room that felt more like a sanctuary than a cell, surrounded by the secrets of a man I was supposed to hate. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. The syndicate had told me Dominic was a chaos bringer, a man who burned lives for sport. But the man I just met, he was something else entirely. He was a king in a burning castle, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was seeing the truth through a cracked lens. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the burner phone. One message was waiting. Target acquired. Confirm status. My fingers hovered over the keys. If I told them I was inside, the countdown to his death would begin. I looked at the door, then at the photo of his mother. I typed, in position. He suspects nothing. Awaiting further instructions. I was lying to the people who raised me. And as I stared out at the black waves of Lake Michigan, I realized that Dominic hadn't just locked the doors of the car. He had locked me into a destiny I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. We're just getting started, and the stakes are already through the roof. Ellen is playing a dangerous game, trapped between her mission and the magnetic pull of a man she's supposed to despise. Have you ever felt like you were caught between what you're supposed to do and what your heart is telling you? Drop a comment below and let us know. We love hearing your stories. And if you're enjoying the suspense, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the moment their world truly explodes. The first week in the Corleone estate was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I wasn't kept in a basement or chained to a wall. Instead, I was given the run of the North Wing, a gilded cage of marble and silk. But every time I turned a corner, I would find Dominic. He was always there, a silent specter in the library, a shadow at the end of the hall, watching me with an intensity that made my pulse erratic. He was studying me, peeling back the layers of my training with nothing but his presence. On the seventh night, the accidental nature of our meeting came to a violent end. I was in the Grand Library, purportedly reading a first-edition Tolstoy, but secretly mapping the thermal sensors I'd discovered in the molding. The house was quiet, too quiet. Usually, the distant hum of the security detail provided a rhythmic comfort, but tonight the silence was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors burst open. Dominic strode in, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his knuckles bleeding. Behind him, Luca Brazivain looked like he'd crawled out of a trench. "Get her to the safe room," Dominic barked, not even looking at me as he headed for a hidden wall panel behind a row of encyclopedias. "What's happening?" I demanded, dropping the book. "Dominic, talk to me." "The what doesn't matter, Ellen," he snapped, his voice tight with a raw edge I hadn't heard before. The who is your people? It seems the Vanguard Syndicate is tired of waiting for your status reports. They've sent a recovery team. Or more likely, a cleanup crew. My heart plummeted. The Syndicate didn't do recovery. If they were here, it meant I was compromised. I was a loose end they were coming to snip. Before I could respond, the skylight above us shattered. Shards of glass rained down like lethal diamonds. 3 figures in tactical gear rappelled down on high-tension wires, their suppressed submachine guns spitting silent death. "Down!" Dominic roared. He didn't dive for cover, he lunged for me. He tackled me to the floor, his massive frame shielding mine as bullets shredded the expensive leather sofa where I had been sitting seconds before. I felt the heat of his body, the frantic thrum of his heart against my back. He wasn't just protecting an asset, he was protecting me. In the chaos, I saw my opportunity. A sidearm had skittered across the floor from a downed guard. I could take it. I could kill Dominic right now, claim I did it in the crossfire, and wait for the syndicate to rescue me. This was the moment I had been trained for since childhood. I scrambled for the gun, my fingers closing around the cold steel. I rolled, bringing the weapon up, aiming it straight at the back of Dominic's head as he returned fire at the intruders. "Dominic, move!" I screamed. He froze for a fraction of a second, his eyes meeting mine in the reflection of a glass cabinet. He saw the gun. He saw the intent. He didn't flinch. He didn't try to disarm me. He simply turned back to the assassins, leaving his back wide open to me. "Do what you have to do, Ellen," he said over the roar of the gunfire. "But do it fast. More are coming." The betrayal I felt wasn't his. It was my own. My finger trembled on the trigger. I looked at the men in the tactical gear, the men who had raised me, the men who had told me they were the good guys. They weren't aiming for Dominic anymore. They were aiming for us. A burst of fire chipped the marble pillar next to my head. They were going to kill me too. In that heartbeat, the lies of the Vanguard syndicate crumbled. They hadn't sent me on a mission of justice. They had sent me to be a sacrificial lamb. I shifted my aim. I didn't shoot Dominic. I fired 3 precise rounds into the chest of the lead assassin. Dominic didn't look surprised. He just reached down, grabbed my hand, and hauled me to my feet. "Good choice," he grunted. "Now run." We sprinted through the darkened halls, the house alive with the sounds of combat. We reached the underground garage just as a black SUV slammed through the reinforced gates. "Get in," Dominic commanded, shoving me into a reinforced armored sedan. He jumped into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life with a predatory snarl. As we tore out of the estate, weaving through a hail of bullets, a sleek silver motorcycle swerved in front of us. The rider leaned low, a submachine gun tucked into their side. Dominic swerved, sideswiping the bike into a stone wall, but not before a bullet shattered our side view mirror. "Who are they really?" I yelled over the screeching tires. "The syndicate said you were the one killing everyone. They said you killed my father." Dominic took a hard corner, the tire smoking. "Your father was my father's best friend, Ellen. He was the one who discovered the syndicate was using our shipping routes to move human cargo. He was going to go to the authorities. They killed him and told you I did it so they could turn his greatest legacy, you, into their greatest weapon." The revelation was a physical blow. My entire identity, my grief, my rage, it was all built on a foundation of ash. "Why should I believe you?" I whispered, clutching the gun to my chest. Dominic slowed the car as we reached a secluded overlook of the frozen lake. He turned to me, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a look of agonizing sincerity. "Because," he said, reaching into his inner pocket and pulling out a weathered, yellowed envelope. "I've spent 15 years trying to find where they hid you. I have the bank records. I have the logs of the night he died. And I have the letter he wrote to you the day before they took him." He handed me the envelope. I recognized my father's messy, architectural scrawl. My name was on the front. "I didn't lock you in that car to kidnap you, Ellen," Dominic said, his voice breaking the silence of the snowy night. "I locked you in because I knew they were watching that gala. I knew they were going to retire you that night because you were getting too close to the truth. I saved you." At that moment, the monster I was sent to kill was the only thing standing between me and the people who had stolen my life. I looked at the man beside me, a man who had been framed, hunted, and hated, and I felt a surge of something more dangerous than fear. It was a connection. A burning, desperate attraction to the only person in the world who actually knew who I was. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dominic reached out, his hand cupping my cheek. This time I didn't pull away. I leaned into his touch. "Now," he said, his eyes darkening with a fierce resolve. "We stop running. We let them think they've won. And then we burn their world to the ground." Just as he spoke, my burner phone buzzed in my lap. A message from the director. "The asset has malfunctioned. Eliminate both targets. Burn the house." Dominic saw the screen. He looked at me, a grim smile on his face. "Ready to be a double agent for the right side?" I looked at the phone, then at him. I took the device and threw it out the window, watching it disappear into the black depths of the lake. "I'm ready," I said. "The mask has fallen. Ellen now knows the truth, but the danger has only just begun. She's officially joined forces with the man she was supposed to execute, but how long can they keep up the charade? If you were in Ellen's shoes, Would you be able to trust the man you were raised to hate? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your theories on what the director will do next. And if you're hooked on this high-stakes romance, make sure you're subscribed so you can see the sparks fly in the next act. The safe house was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Corleone estate. It was a refurbished industrial loft tucked away in a forgotten corner of the meatpacking district, hidden behind layers of reinforced steel and encrypted security protocols. Here the air was thick with the smell of old paper, gun oil, and the electric hum of high-powered servers. This was Dominic's nerve center, the place where he gathered the evidence the world refused to see. For the next 3 weeks, my life became a blur of high-intensity training and psychological recalibration. Dominic didn't just want me to be a soldier, he wanted me to be a ghost. "The syndicate taught you to be a scalpel," he said one evening, his large hands guiding mine as we disassembled a custom-built sniper rifle in the dim light of the workshop. "Quick, sharp, and disposable. I'm going to teach you to be the shadow. You don't strike until the room is already empty." Our proximity was a constant, low-grade fever. Every time he adjusted my stance, his chest brushing against my shoulder, or every time our fingers lingered over a shared blueprint, the tension between us tightened like a piano wire. I was trained to resist interrogation, to ignore physical pain, and to manipulate targets through seduction, but I had no defense against the raw, quiet gravity of Dominic Toretto Corleone. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke in volumes of protective care. He stayed up until dawn monitoring the syndicate's encrypted frequencies so I could sleep. He remembered that I took my coffee black with a pinch of cinnamon, a detail I'd mentioned only once. And most tellingly, he never once asked me to prove my loyalty again after that night at the lake. He simply trusted me. "Why?" I asked him one night as we sat on the floor of the loft, surrounded by folders of cold cases and shipping manifests. "Why trust me after I held a gun to your head?" Dominic looked up from a spreadsheet, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in his tired eyes. "Because you didn't pull the trigger, Ellen. In my world, people do what they're told. You did what was right. That's the only currency that matters." He reached out, his fingers tracing the faint scar on my wrist from a syndicate training accident. "They tried to turn you into a monster to catch a monster. But they forgot one thing." "What's that?" I whispered, my heart skipping a beat as his hand slid up to cup my jaw. "They forgot that you have a soul," he murmured. "And I've spent too long in the dark not to recognize a light when I see one." The kiss was inevitable. It was a collision of two lonely orbits, desperate, fierce, and tasting of bottled-up longing. It wasn't the practiced seduction I had been taught. It was a surrender. In his arms, the mission didn't matter. The syndicate didn't matter. There was only the heat of his skin and the way he whispered my name like it was a prayer. But our sanctuary was a lie. The tension escalated when we began our first counterstrike. We needed to intercept a digital ledger being moved by a syndicate courier, a man named Anton Shagurvan, a sadistic fixer who had been a ghost in my own training files. The mission took us to a rain-slicked shipyard. I was positioned on a crane, my eye pressed to the scope, while Dominic moved through the shipping containers below. My job was to cover him, to be his guardian angel. "Target in sight," I whispered into the comms. 3 o'clock. "He's got the briefcase." "Wait for my signal," Dominic's voice crackled in my ear. Suddenly my thermal scanners spiked. "Dominic, move. It's a trap. There are snipers on the north roof." The shipyard erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up the rain like strobe lights. I saw Dominic dive behind a steel crate as bullets sparked off the metal. My training kicked in, cold, mechanical, precise. I took out the first sniper, then the second. But as I swung my rifle to the third, I saw something that froze my blood. The courier wasn't running. He was standing in the middle of the firelight, holding a remote detonator. He wasn't there to deliver a ledger. He was there to deliver a message. Dominic, get out of there. The crates are rigged. The explosion was a wall of orange fire that shook the very foundation of the crane. I screamed his name, the sound lost in the roar of the blast. Through the smoke, I saw the courier slip away into a waiting black SUV. I scrambled down the crane, my boots hitting the wet pavement with a splash. I ran toward the inferno, ignoring the searing heat. Dominic. Dominic. I found him pinned under a fallen steel beam, his face covered in soot and blood, but his eyes were wide and alert. He was struggling to move, his shoulder clearly dislocated. I'm here, I gasped, throwing my weight against the beam. I've got you. The ledger. He wheezed, pointing toward the burning debris. It was a decoy. They wanted us both here. They're testing us, Ellen. As I helped him limp toward our getaway car, a chilling realization settled in my gut. The syndicate wasn't just trying to kill us anymore. They were playing with us. They had planted a red herring, a fake lead, to see how we worked together, to see where our weaknesses lay. And our weakness was glaringly obvious. We cared if the other lived. Back at the safe house, as I stitched a jagged gash on his ribs, the silence between us was different. It was no longer the silence of two people getting to know each other. It was the silence of two soldiers who knew the tide was turning against them. They know, I said softly, the needle shaking slightly in my hand. They know I've flipped. They're going to come with everything they have now. Dominic hissed as I pulled a stitch tight, but he didn't pull away. He grabbed my hand, forcing me to look at him. Let them come. We have something they'll never have. What? A reason to survive that isn't just a command, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But even as he spoke, I noticed a file he had tried to hide under the table. A file with my father's name on it, dated after his supposed death. My heart went cold. Was there another layer to this lie? Was Dominic still keeping secrets, or was the syndicate deeper in my blood than I ever imagined? The heat is rising, and not just from the explosions. Ellen and Dominic are finally admitting their feelings, but the shadows of the past are refusing to stay buried. What was in that file? And can Ellen truly trust that Dominic has told her everything? This is where things get really complicated. What do you think? Is Dominic hiding something for her own protection, or is there a twist we haven't seen yet? Let us know your wildest theories in the comments. And if you're holding your breath like I am, hit that subscribe button to see the truth come to light in the midpoint revelation. The fog in San Francisco didn't just roll in. It haunted the streets like a living shroud. We arrived under the cover of a simulated extraction. According to the plan, I had drugged Dominic and signaled the syndicate for a pickup at a secluded pier near the base of the Golden Gate Bridge. But as the black tactical vans screeched to a halt and the doors slid open, I realized Dominic's warning about the San Francisco Protocol was an understatement. This wasn't a pickup. It was an execution. Package secured, I shouted, my voice cracking with a faint coldness as I stood over Dominic's slumped form. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Underneath his jacket, I knew Dominic was awake, his hand hovering over the silent alarm we'd rigged. The circle of tactical lights blinded me. From the center of the glare, a figure emerged. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like the man who used to tuck me in and tell me stories about knights and dragons. Sean Hunt Connery stepped into the light, his hair a distinguished silver, his suit sharp enough to bleed on. Well done, Ellen, my father said. His voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, paternal, and utterly devoid of a soul. I knew the prodigal daughter would return. You always did have a taste for the dramatic. I did what you asked, I said, my hand trembling as I gestured to Dominic. Now give me my life back. Let me go. My father smiled, a thin, paper-cut expression. Oh, Ellen. You've been gone too long. You've forgotten how the syndicate handles malfunctions. You didn't just fail. You bonded with the target. You let him touch you. You let him change you. He signaled to the guards. Before I could reach for the concealed blade in my sleeve, a taser prong slammed into my shoulder. 5,000 volts surged through my nervous system. My world turned into a white-hot scream of agony as I collapsed to the wet asphalt. No. Dominic roared, abandoning the ruse. He surged upward, a titan of fury, catching the nearest guard with a blow that shattered bone. But there were too many of them. A rifle butt caught him across the temple and then another. They swarmed him, pinning him down with a ruthlessness that made my stomach churn. Dominic. I tried to crawl toward him, but my limbs felt like leaden weights. My father walked over and looked down at me, his boot pressing into the hand I was using to reach for Dominic. He's a relic, Ellen. A ghost of a family that refused to evolve. However, you are a masterpiece. But even masterpieces need to be stripped down and repainted when they get dirty. He looked at his men. Take the Corleone boy to the processing facility. I want him alive for the interrogation. I want to know every account, every contact, and every secret he's been hoarding. Once he's empty, kill him. And take my daughter to the reconditioning suite. We're going to erase the last month from her mind. You can't. I screamed, tears of rage and helplessness blurring my vision. I'll kill you. I swear to God I'll kill you. You've already tried, my dear, he whispered, leaning down. But you missed. Every time. They dragged us apart. I watched as they threw Dominic into the back of a separate van. Our eyes met for one final, agonizing second. There was no fear in his gaze, only a devastating, quiet apology. He had tried to protect me and he had failed. As the doors slammed shut, severing our connection, the silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Hours later, or perhaps it was days, I found myself strapped to a cold metal chair in a room that smelled of ozone and bleach. The syndicate's reconditioning suite wasn't a torture chamber in the traditional sense. It was a sensory deprivation tank designed to break the psyche. The director, or rather my father, sat on the other side of a glass partition. He's holding out longer than expected. My father's voice came through the intercom, sounding bored. Your lover is quite resilient. They've broken 3 of his ribs and pulled 2 fingernails, and he still hasn't given up the decryption keys. He keeps saying the same thing over and over. I lifted my head, my hair matted with sweat, my eyes burning. What? He keeps saying, she is not yours anymore, my father chuckled. Pathetic, really. Such a waste of a good bloodline. He pressed a button and the screen on the wall flickered to life. It was a live feed of a dark, damp cell. Dominic was chained to a ceiling beam, his body a map of bruises and lacerations. He looked broken, his head hanging low, but as the camera zoomed in, I saw his lips moving. He wasn't praying. He was counting. He was counting the seconds between the guard rotations, the very thing he had taught me to do in the safe house. Even in his darkest hour, he was still fighting. He was still trying to find a way back to me. See this, Ellen, my father said, his voice turning cold. This is the price of your love. If you had just killed him on New Year's Eve, he would have died quickly. Now he will die in pieces. And you will watch every second of it until your mind finally snaps and you become the weapon I designed you to be. He turned off the feed, leaving me in total darkness. The despair was a physical weight crushing the air out of my lungs. I was alone. Dominic was being tortured. My father was a monster. There was no escape, no backup, and no hope. I curled into a ball as much as the restraints would allow, the cold of the metal seeping into my skin. I had lost everything. My past, my future, and the only man who had ever truly loved me. In the dark, I could almost feel Dominic's hand on mine, hear his voice whispering, "The doors only open when I say they do." But the doors were shut, and the man who held the key was fading away in a cell I couldn't find. This was the end. I was going to die here, a broken tool in a madman's workshop, and the world would never know that Dominic Toretto Corleone was the only hero Chicago ever had. My heart is absolutely breaking. They've been torn apart, and the man who should have protected Ellen is the one tearing her soul to pieces. Is there any way out of this? Feels completely hopeless. Have you ever felt like you were at your absolute breaking point, where the darkness felt like it was never going to end? Tell us how you found your strength in the comments. We need some inspiration right now. And please, if you want to see them find a way back to each other, subscribe and hit that bell. We need every bit of hope we can get for the turning point. The darkness of the reconditioning suite was absolute. A void designed to swallow a person's identity until they were nothing but a hollow vessel for the syndicate's commands. But my father, the great architect of my misery, had made a fatal mistake. He had raised me to be a master of observation, a scholar of the minute and the overlooked. And he had forgotten that I had spent the last month learning from a man who had survived a lifetime of being hunted. I stopped screaming. I stopped weeping. I forced my heart rate down the way Dominic had taught me during those long nights in the loft. When the world goes black, Ellen, don't look for the light. Listen for the rhythm. I listened. I heard the hum of the air filtration system, a steady, low-frequency thrum. Every 42 minutes, there was a slight dip in the power, a momentary shudder in the vibration against my spine. That was the backup generator cycling. I heard the distant metallic click of boots on the polished floor outside, 3 guards rotating every 2 hours. But most importantly, I felt the cold. My father had left me in my tattered gala dress, a cruel reminder of the night I failed. But inside the hem of that dress, sewn into the reinforced lining by my own hand months ago, was a ceramic shim, no larger than a thumbnail, undetectable by metal scanners. With a grunt of agony, I arched my back, using the friction of the chair to slide the fabric upward. My muscles screamed, still recovering from the taser shocks, but I pushed through the pain. I grabbed the shim with my teeth and spat it into my palm. I didn't just pick the locks, I disassembled my own fear. As the wrist restraints fell away with a muted clink, I didn't rush for the door. I waited for the 42nd minute. When the power dipped and the cameras flickered, I moved. I didn't exit through the door. I climbed into the ventilation shaft above the filtration unit. I crawled through the narrow, galvanized steel tunnels, the taste of dust and old copper in my mouth. I wasn't just escaping, I was hunting. I followed the sound of the intercom system, tracing the wires back to the central hub. And that's when I heard it, the voice that sparked the fire of my resolve. "He won't break, sir," a guard's voice crackled through a vent. "He's lost a lot of blood. His vitals are dropping. If we go any further, he'll go into cardiac arrest." "Then let him," my father's voice replied, chillingly detached. "If he won't give up the keys to the Corleone archives, he's useless to me. Throw him in the bay with the rest of the trash." "Wait," another voice interrupted. It was Luca Brazivain. My heart nearly stopped. Had Dominic's right hand betrayed him? I positioned myself over the grate, peering down into a high-security monitoring room. Luca was standing there, his hands zip-tied, but his posture was unbroken. He had been captured too. "You think you're winning, Hunt?" Luca spat, looking directly at my father through the glass. "You think you've broken him? Look at the screen. Look at his hand." My father leaned in, squinting at the monitor showing Dominic's cell. I looked too. Dominic's hand wasn't twitching from pain. He was tapping his fingers against the metal leg of the table in a rhythmic, deliberate pattern. Tap tap, tap, tap tap tap. It was Morse code. A frequency. "He's not dying," I whispered to myself, a surge of hope so violent it almost made me dizzy. "He's broadcasting." Dominic hadn't just been counting the seconds. He had been using the internal wiring of the interrogation table to send a low-burst signal to his remaining loyalists. He wasn't waiting to be saved, he was calling in the strike. In that moment, the victim died and the partner was born. I realized I didn't need to find the key to the door. I was the key. I kicked the grate open, dropping into the monitoring room like a vengeful shadow. Before the guards could draw their weapons, I was a whirlwind of silk and steel. I used the ceramic shim to slit the throat of the nearest sentry and snatched his sidearm. 2 shots, suppressed and precise, took down the others. My father turned, his face a mask of shock that quickly melted into a twisted pride. "Ellen, look at you. I knew you had it in you." I didn't say a word. I leveled the gun at his chest. "You're not my father," I said, my voice as cold as the Lake Michigan ice. "You're just the first ghost I'm putting to rest. If you kill me, the lockdown initiates," he taunted, slowly reaching for a button on his desk. "The gas vents in his cell will open. He'll be dead before you reach the elevator." "Then I won't kill you yet," I said. I fired a shot into the control panel, frying the lockdown sequence. "I'm going to let him do it." I grabbed a set of keys and a tactical vest from a fallen guard, then turned to Luca. I sliced his ties with the shim. "Where is he?" Luca looked at me, a begrudging respect shining in his hard eyes. "Level 4. Solitary." But Ellen, the syndicate's main force is moving in. We have 5 minutes before this place becomes a tomb. Then we'd better move fast, I said. As we sprinted toward the elevators, the building began to shake. The signal Dominic had been sending? It wasn't just to his men. It was a kill switch for the building's structural integrity. He was going to bring the whole mountain down on top of the syndicate even if he was still inside. The turning point wasn't just my escape. It was the realization that Dominic and I were thinking the exact same thing. We weren't survivors. We were the end of the line. And if we were going down together, holding the match that started the fire. I reached the heavy steel door of level 4. My hands flew over the keypad, the codes Dominic had whispered during our training sessions clicking into place like a puzzle. The door hissed open. Dominic was slumped against the wall, his eyes half closed, his chest barely moving. But when he heard the door, he lifted his head. When he saw me, covered in blood, hair wild, gun in hand, a slow, battered smile spread across his face. "You're late," he wheezed. "The traffic was terrible," I whispered, throwing his arm over my shoulder and hauling him up. "Let's go home, Dominic." "Not yet," he said, his grip tightening on my hand. "We have one more stop. The server room. We don't just kill the men, Ellen. We kill the lie. The tide has turned. Ellen has broken free, found her fire, and reunited with Dominic in the heart of the enemy's lair. They aren't just running anymore. They're tearing the whole system down. But can they make it out before the building collapses? And what will happen when they face Ellen's father for the final time? I am literally on the edge of my seat. What's the one thing you'd say to a person who betrayed you if you finally had the upper hand? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The climactic resolution is up next, and it's going to be explosive. The sirens within the facility weren't the standard high-pitched wails of a fire alarm. They were a deep tectonic thrumming that signaled the self-destruct sequence Dominic had initiated. The very air seemed to vibrate with the countdown of a dying empire. I kept my shoulder under Dominic's arm, his weight heavy and solid, a grounding reality in a world of crumbling shadows. "The server room is behind the reinforced bulkhead at the end of this corridor," Dominic coughed, each breath a rattling testament to the brutality he'd endured. He leaned heavily against the wall for a second, his eyes searching mine. "Ellen, if we do this, there's no going back. The data I've encrypted, it contains every transaction, every fake murder, every person your father ever erased. Once I hit send to the global press and the authorities, the Corleone name is dead. But so is the syndicate." "The Corleone name was a burden you never asked for," I said, checking the magazine of my stolen submachine gun. "And the syndicate is a cancer I'm ready to cut out. Let's finish it." We reached the heavy blast doors of the central hub. Just as the hydraulic locks began to hiss open, a voice boomed over the intercom, echoing through the cavernous hall. "You always were a romantic, Dominic. But romance is just a weakness that masquerades as a virtue." My father stepped out from behind a row of humming server towers. He wasn't alone. 6 of his elite Praetorian guards flanked him, their weapons leveled at us with lethal stillness. But my father wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a remote, the manual override for the server's cooling system. "One click and the servers melt down," Sean Hunt Connery said, his eyes bright with a manic, desperate energy. "The data dies with us. You'll have no proof, no leverage. You'll just be 2 more casualties of a tragic explosion." Dominic stepped forward, pulling away from my support. He stood tall, despite the blood soaking through his shirt, despite the tremors in his hands. He looked like a king standing amidst the ruins of a kingdom he had burned to save the people. "You're wrong, Sean," Dominic said, his voice regaining that terrifying resonant power. "The data isn't just on those servers." I mirrored the drive to a cloud server the moment Ellen stepped into the room. "The send button isn't on your console. It's on the heartbeat monitor strapped to my chest." Dominic pulled back his collar, revealing a flickering LED light taped over his heart. "If my heart stops, the truth goes live. If you kill us, you lose everything. If you let us go, you still lose everything. But at least you'll be alive to see the world realize what a pathetic coward you truly are." My father's face contorted. The refined architect vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. "Kill them. Kill them both. I don't care about the data. I'll build it again. I'll build it all again from the blood." The room erupted into a symphony of violence. I dived behind a server rack, my weapon spitting fire. I wasn't just an assassin anymore. I was a shield. I took down 2 of the guards before they could even find cover, my movements a blur of instinct and adrenaline. Luca Brazivane appeared from a side maintenance hatch, a literal force of nature. He didn't use a gun. He used a combat knife in his bare hands, tearing through the Praetorians like they were made of paper. In the center of the chaos, Dominic moved toward my father. He didn't run. He walked. Each step was a deliberate, crushing weight. Bullets whizzed past him, but he didn't flinch. He was a man who had already faced death on New Year's Eve and found it wanting. My father scrambled for a sidearm dropped by a fallen guard. He aimed it at Dominic's chest. "Stay back. I made you. I made this world." "You made nothing but graves," Dominic growled. I saw my father's finger tighten on the trigger. I didn't think. I lunged from my cover, tackling my father to the ground just as the gun discharged. The bullet grazed my shoulder, a hot, searing kiss of lead, but I didn't stop. I pinned him to the floor, my hands around his throat. I looked down at the man who had stolen my childhood, the man who had lied about my mother, my father, and my very soul. I could have ended him right there. My thumbs were pressed into his windpipe. I could feel the life fluttering beneath my touch. "Ellen." He wheezed, his eyes bulging. "Your father." I loosened my grip just enough for him to breathe. I looked him in the eye, and for the first time in my life I felt absolutely nothing for him. No rage. No hate. Just a cold, clinical pity. "No," I said. "You're just a mistake I made on New Year's Eve. And I'm finally correcting it. I didn't kill him." I pulled a pair of heavy-duty zip ties from my tactical vest and cinched them around his wrists. "Dominic." I shouted over the roar of the fire starting to consume the wiring. "Now." Dominic reached the central console. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at me. A silent question passed between us, a final check of our souls. I nodded. He slammed his fist onto the enter key. Around the world, in newsrooms from London to Tokyo, thousands of gigabytes of evidence began to upload. The syndicate's accounts were frozen. Their safe houses were mapped. Their political puppets were exposed. The lie that had ruled the underworld for 40 years didn't just break. It vaporized. The facility groaned. A massive explosion from the lower levels sent a shockwave that knocked us all to our feet. "The building is going," Luca yelled, grabbing a wounded Dominic. "We have to move. Now." We sprinted for the emergency exit, a narrow tunnel leading to a private dock on the bay. Behind us, the reconditioning suite, the server room, and the man who called himself my father were swallowed by the fire and the falling stone. As we burst out into the cool, salt-tinged air of the San Francisco night, the facility behind us collapsed into the hillside with a roar that sounded like the end of the world. Dominic and I tumbled into a waiting speedboat, the engine already idling. I pulled him into my lap, my hands pressed against his wounds to stop the bleeding. The sky was lit with a bruised purple dawn, the fog finally lifting to reveal a world that was suddenly, terrifyingly new. "We did it," I whispered, my tears finally falling hot and fast onto his soot-stained face. "It's over, Dominic. The doors are open." Dominic reached up, his hand trembling as he wiped a tear from my cheek. He looked at the smoking ruin of the mountain, then back at me. "The doors didn't just open, Ellen. They're gone. There's nowhere to hide anymore." "I don't want to hide," I said, leaning down to press my forehead against his. "I just want to be with you." The boat surged forward, cutting through the black water of the bay, leaving the fire and the lies behind. We were battered, we were bleeding, and we were the most wanted people on the planet. But for the first time in our lives, we were free. That was the most intense showdown I've ever seen. They didn't just survive. They dismantled the entire system. But what comes after the world knows the truth? Is there really a place for a butcher and an assassin in a world of light? I want to hear your thoughts. Was Ellen right to spare her father, or should she have finished him? Drop your comments below and let's debate. And guys, we are at the final stretch. Hit that subscribe button right now to see the beautiful, heart-wrenching conclusion to this journey. You won't believe where they end up. Part 9. Satisfying Conclusion. 6 months later, the world was still reeling from the Corleone leak, but the headlines had finally begun to migrate from the front page to the history books. The Vanguard syndicate had been dismantled piece by piece, its leaders imprisoned and its assets seized by international task forces. The man the world once called the Butcher of the Great Lakes was now a ghost, a legend whispered about in the corridors of power, a man who had burned his own empire to expose a greater evil. Far from the gray slush of Chicago and the treacherous fog of San Francisco, the air smelled of lemon groves and salt spray. I stood on the terrace of a small whitewashed villa perched on a cliffside in the Amalfi Coast. The Mediterranean stretched out before me like a sheet of hammered turquoise, vast and indifferent to the blood and fire of my previous life. I was no longer Ellen Ripley Hunt. My passport carried a different name now, one that had no weight of vengeance or duty attached to it. I was just a woman watching the sunset. The glass door behind me slid open with a gentle hiss. I didn't need to turn around to know it was him. The rhythm of his step, slightly heavier on the left side where the injuries had left their mark, was the metronome of my new life. Dominic walked to the railing, his linen shirt open at the collar, showing the faint, silvered lines of scars that were now just memories. He looked younger. The haunted weariness that had defined his gaze on that fateful New Year's Eve had been replaced by a quiet, steady peace. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside me, his hand finding mine on the warm stone of the railing. His grip was firm, a silent anchor. "You're thinking about him," Dominic said softly. It wasn't a question. "I was thinking about the girl in the silk dress," I admitted, leaning my head against his shoulder. "The one who got into the wrong car. I realize now she didn't make a mistake. She was finding her way home." "Your father survived the sentencing, you know," Dominic said, his voice level. "He'll spend the rest of his life in a maximum security cell, watching the world move on without his influence. It's a fate worse than death for a man like him." "I know," I replied. "But he doesn't own my thoughts anymore. He's just a shadow in a room with no windows." We had spent the last half-year healing, not just physically but spiritually. Dominic had used his remaining legitimate resources to set up a foundation for the victims of the syndicate's human trafficking rings, a silent penance for the name he carried. And I had learned what it meant to live without a mission. I had learned to paint, to cook, to sleep through the night without a knife under my pillow. But more than that, we had learned each other. Without the adrenaline of the hunt or the fear of betrayal, we had found a love that was deep, slow, and indestructible. It was a love forged in fire, yes, but it was being cooled in the gentle waters of a shared future. "I have something for you," Dominic said, reaching into his pocket. My heart hammered, not with the old terror, but with a new, fluttering anticipation. He pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, there wasn't a diamond or a ruby inside. It was a simple, tarnished brass key. "The keys to the villa?" I asked, smiling. "No," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that still made my breath catch. "This is the key to the old sedan. The one from Chicago. I kept it." I took the key, feeling the cold metal in my palm. "Why?" "Because that car was a cage for both of us," he whispered, stepping closer until there was no space between us. "But it was also the only place where we were ever honest. I kept it to remind me that no matter how many locks are on the door, the only thing that truly keeps us bound is our choice." He took the key from my hand and tossed it over the railing. I watched as it glinted in the dying sunlight, a tiny spark of brass falling through the air until it vanished into the deep blue of the Mediterranean. "We don't need keys anymore, Ellen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "There are no more locks. No more secrets. Just us." He pulled me into a kiss that tasted of the sea and the sun. It was a promise kept. It was a New Year's resolution that had finally come true. As the first stars began to pierce the twilight, I realized that the wrong car had taken me exactly where I was meant to be. We walked back into the villa together, the light from the windows spilling out onto the terrace like gold. The world outside might still be a place of shadows and complexity, but here within these walls, there was only peace. The mission was over. The hunter and the prey had disappeared, leaving behind only two people who had dared to choose love over a legacy of hate. As I closed the door behind us, I didn't hear the heavy thud of a vault. I heard the soft click of a home being sealed, a place where the only thing that belonged to anyone was our hearts belonging to each other forever. And that, my friends, is the end of our journey. From the snowy streets of Chicago to the sun-drenched cliffs of Italy, Alan and Dominic have shown us that even in the darkest worlds, love is the ultimate truth. Their story started with a mistake and ended with a masterpiece. I want to thank you all so much for sticking with us through every twist, every betrayal, and every heartbeat of this 40-minute epic. This has been one of the most emotional stories we've ever shared, and your support means the world to us. Before you go, I have one last question for you. If you could start your life over today, leaving everything behind for the person you love, would you do it? Let us know in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We have so many more stories of redemption, romance, and mystery waiting for you. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, remember, sometimes the wrong turn is the only path to the right destination. See you in the next story. The end.